Hello, Internet. I am Pastor Recoil, and welcome to my parish. Today is the third Sunday after Epiphany, and we're going to talk about it. Welcome to Pastor Recoil's Parish, where I talk about some things that you may not have heard about in church, either because they're not quite appropriate for all audiences, or it just isn't something that's easy to talk about in a sermon. Today's readings for the third Sunday after Epiphany are Isaiah 9, 1 through 4, Psalm 27, verse 1 and 4 through 9, 1 Corinthians 1, 10 through 18, and Matthew 4, 12 through 23. Today we're going to talk about the many different flavors of Christianity in the world. Last week I talked about what it meant to be part of God's people, that God's people are meant to be instruments of liberation, hope, love, and freedom in the world. While that is a pretty straightforward call, it's so simple in its premise that it leaves a whole lot of room for interpretation. And if there's anything about humans that's consistent, it's that we love for our group to be right and other groups to be wrong. In 1 Corinthians, Paul opens his letter talking about the division within the church in Corinth. Paul writes, "Some folk are saying that we follow Paul's teaching, and others say we follow Apollos. Still others say, well, I follow Peter. And others of them more say, well, I don't follow any of y'all because I follow Jesus." But Paul tells the Corinthians that we all follow the same Christ who was crucified for us, and that we shouldn't get caught up in all the different folk who taught us about Christ. And yet today there are a seemingly endless number of different flavors of Christianity. Christianity in many ways seems more divided than it has ever been. So how can there be so many when our own scriptures tell us to be united together in one Christ? I think part of the challenge is the very simplicity of the things that Jesus calls us to do. Love your neighbor as yourself is so straightforward that any two people will have at least three ideas on what the best way to love one another is. And the problem only gets compounded when, while some divisions of the church were well-intentioned, not all of them have been. As Christianity grew in the handful of centuries before its acceptance into broader Roman culture, churches developed many regional differences. The church in Rome was different from the one in Antioch, which was different from the one in Jerusalem, and so on. Christians weren't able to meet in large groups and consolidate. So many of the oldest strands of Christianity, like the Ethiopian Orthodox and other Oriental Orthodox churches, have differences that relate to geography as well as theological and practical differences. After the popularity of Christianity grew in the Roman Empire, Christian flavors with more political and social power sought to eliminate the weaker ones that were perceived as holding either wrong belief or wrong practice. And so the Christian church became a bit more of a monolith, though there were always significant groups of Christians outside of the authority of empire. As time went on, and especially after the collapse of central Roman authority in Western Europe, Christianity would fracture into two basic groups: the Roman Catholic branch in the western half of the old Roman Empire, and the Byzantine or Orthodox branch in the still continuing eastern half of the Roman Empire. The eastern half of the church is much less interesting in terms of its divisions. Its splits tend to be regional in character and are all semi-united under the Archbishop of Constantinople. The western half of the church, though, is a bit of a hot mess. Out from the Roman Catholic Church came many different Christian flavors: Lutheran, Reformed, Anglican, Anabaptist, And then out of those came even more groups: Presbyterians, Methodists, Episcopalians, Baptists, Assemblies of God, Seventh-day Adventists, Nazarene, Alliance, Foursquare, and so on and so on. It sounds like the situation Paul describing in Corinth. All of these people claim that their way is the right way. Many of these splits did start with the best intentions. Folk were seeking to follow the teachings of Jesus the best way that they could, but almost all of them have ended with fights. Sometimes just with words, but often with physical violence as well. There are some movements to bring more unity among the various sects of Christianity, to recognize the ways that Jesus' message is one of love, liberation, and deliverance from the evils of the world, while still allowing room for difference of belief and practice. There is a place for all of these differences to exist in unity with one another to fulfill God's purposes. But we're pretty obviously just at the start of this process. There is much more in the news of churches splitting apart, like what's happening now with the United Methodist Church and has happened before with Lutherans, Presbyterians, and Episcopalians. It can be hard to view these splits in positive light, but I hope that everyone who's doing this are trying to be faithful to God's message of hope. And I yearn for a day when all of God's church can gather together again as one church, one people that are united in love, working for the liberation of the oppressed and oppressor alike, even if that day might not be on this side of the new creation. So if you want to see more content like this, check out the links to my right, or click the logo below my face to subscribe so you'll know when my next video comes out. Thank you for watching, and take the time this week to love your neighbor as yourself, especially if you don't like them all that much.